board. So thank you all so much for coming, and to all our guests who are here and officers. We are truly grateful. So just to let you all know that this meeting will be webcast, and specifically for those who are unable to join us in person, and obviously it will be recorded as well. Could I kindly ask whoever will be speaking that as soon as you finish speaking, you kindly mute yourself so that we can move on to the next person. And just to remind you that please make sure your systems are muted if you're not speaking. So I would like to introduce all members who are here so that those who are watching from the public will know who you are. And I will start with Councillor Hamilton.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Nicole Sharp, Temple Newson Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson from Guiseley and Rawdon Ward, covering for Councillor Arif Hussain.
Good morning, Isaac Wilson, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Andy Rowntree from Kirkstall Ward, and I'm here today substituting for Councillor Miller.
John Garvani, Councillor for Horsforth Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Mohammed Shazad, Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
But we were starting up that end. Who am I? Sandy, Councillor Lay for Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Councillor Woodley Ward.
Good. Billy Flynn, Councillor for Ward.
Hi, Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you very much, Becky. And Becky would be taking minutes for us today. And thank you to all the elected members who are subbing as well. Welcome to our scrutiny board. Right, going straight to our agenda items, I will now pass on to Becky to take on agenda items 1 to 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 1, appeals against the refusal of inspection documents. There are no appeals today. Item 2, exclusions. There are no items excluded from the public domain. Item 3, late items of business. There's no late items today. Item 4, declarations of interest. Can I ask members to disclose any interest in accordance with the Code of Conduct? I'll take silence as none. Apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Foster. Councillor Firth will be attending at some point to substitute. Councillor Miller has sent apologies. Councillor Rowntree is substituting. Councillor Hussain has sent apologies. Councillor Thompson is substituting. Councillor Cooper has also had to send apologies. She's unwell today, and Councillor Pryor will be covering both of today's main items. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Becky. Next, agenda item number 6, minutes of the last meeting held on the 1st of November 2023. Could I ask if there are any matters arising from that? Okay, I take silence to be a no. Could I ask that we approve the minutes as a correct record of the meeting for the 1st of November? Have we got someone? What did you say? You're happy? Oh, just nod and give me a smile. Great. Thank you very much. All right. Okay. Agenda item number 7. Before I start, I just want to say huge thank you to Eve Roothouse and her team. Last Friday, we had our remote working group, and I tell you, is one of the best presentations I have seen in a long time when it comes to data, when we request for that from Scrutiny. So on behalf of the board, Eve, we just want to say a huge thank you. And just to let members know that you really can go onto this system now and get almost every kind of data that you need about employment of your constituency in terms of gender, in terms of the section in the city, types of, in industry of work that we have in the city. So huge thanks to yourself and your team for what you produced on Friday. It's a shame that we were not able to record it and share it with everyone else, but I believe there's something happening to make that happen, and people can actually get to see it sometime. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Marshall-Clayton. It's very kind of you to say so. Yes, unfortunately, the technology defeated us last week in terms of recording it, but we have agreed that we'll do a recording of the presentation so that members that couldn't make it get that feedback. It might be after Christmas because we got the call from Ofsted yesterday for employment and skills, so they're in next week. So it may be that the team will have to come back to that in the new year.
That's fine. Thank you very much. We'll definitely want you to have a very Merry Christmas. So do not rush. Enjoy your Christmas, and we'll catch up in the new year. Yes, Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just say how much I appreciated it as well, and thank you to you for extending the invite to members of other scrutiny boards. It's really worthwhile. Thanks.
You're very welcome. We're kind like that in this scrutiny board, so don't worry. Right, stop, Councillor, behave. Okay, so locality building review. I just want to say, following the LGA review earlier this year, the scrutiny board committed to scrutinizing the locality building review. I'm sure you all can remember that, and that's a piece of work that's very, very important to all of us and to all that's going on in the city at this time. So the report in front of all of you today provides an update on the locality building review, and is set in the context of the recommendations of the LGA peer review as well, and the council's current financial challenge. So I will now ask officers to introduce themselves and the report before opening up questions to members of the board. So can I ask Councillor Pryor to introduce himself as well, and those who would be dealing with this agenda item? Over to you, Councillor Pryor.
Thank you. So I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of Leeds City Council and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Angela Barnacle. I'm the Chief Officer for Asset Management and Regeneration in City Development.
Morning, everybody. Lee Hemsworth. I'm a Chief Officer in Communities, Housing and Environment, here on behalf of James Rogers to contribute to this item.
And I'm Mark Mills, Head of Asset Management for Leeds City Council.
So if it's okay with everybody, I'll do a very brief intro and then I'll hand over to Mark, who's got a short presentation that hopefully will bring the report more to life. It's not meant to be a formal presentation, so at any point there are questions throughout it, please do feel free. Don't wait for the end. So the locality building review is a really important piece of work, and certainly for the last 13, 14 years, the council has been working really hard to make sure the size of its buildings meet the size of its services. And I think that's been really well known and really well documented and understood where that is an office type of use. So for instance, in the city centre over the last 10 years, we've gone down from 17 buildings down to 3 as our services have changed and how we use buildings has really changed. And what was really highlighted in the peer review that the LGA undertook last year was actually we still had a very significant building footprint in our localities, and actually the utilisation of those buildings didn't match the number of buildings that we had. And so over the last 12 months, we've been doing 2 pieces of work. The first phase was a real data gathering, information gathering about what was out there, who was using, what was the utilisation, and what was the condition piece of work. The second phase, and led by James Rogers, the Director of Communities, Housing and Environment, is about how do our services change in the coming few years in the localities, and what does that then mean for the buildings that we need. Those 2 pieces of work are slightly running at different parallels. So the service transformation work is really just about to kick off, isn't it, Lee? And Lee will talk you through the headlines, and that will really inform the buildings and where we need them and what uses we need. At the same time, what we do know is that we've got significant underutilisation within our estate. So under asset management and led by Mark, we're running a piece of work to say, what are the buildings now that we think we could divest of? And that's not about service closure. That's about the services that are happening in those buildings. Could they be somewhere else in the locality for a short time whilst this piece of work is undertaken? And the presentation today will cover both parts of that. So I'll hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Angela. So I think I'll just get the presentation working. So as Angela says, we've already been on a journey over the past 11 years, and on screen now are some of the headlines from what has been achieved. So we've delivered substantial revenue savings, also delivered capital receipts, and clearly we've reduced our liabilities and the amount of space that we've got very much focused on offices, and that has obviously involved a lot of investment around changing the workplace, and modernisation of the spaces that we continue to occupy. For some reason, yeah. I'll continue, but because I think this is covering points that have already been made. So I think there's a number of drivers to the work, as Councillor Marshall-Tung has already raised and Angela has. The peer review identified a real need for us to look at our locality estate, and that was in the context of not just the number of buildings we've got, but also the nature of the services and how we deliver services in localities. And then, as we all know, the budget pressures, both the immediate budget pressures and those in the medium-term financial strategy. In terms of our estate, it is still substantial, and we've got around about 900 properties or assets, individually listed assets. Now, some of those are very small scale. They may just be storage cabins or containers or structures in parks, but we have got a number of frontline operational buildings within that, and I think, again, because of budgets, our estate is too big. It's not affordable. It's not fit for purpose. There's a lot of backlog maintenance. And I think you'll all recognise that going to some of the buildings that are out in your communities. But I think it's worth saying that, you know, clearly the buildings we've got, they enable service delivery. So it's very much around looking at how we can deliver the services differently, but then how our estate responds to that. So both elements inform one another. Worth saying that there's while we're going to focus on locality buildings, there's separate conversations taking place and an exploration of how we use our city centre estate, as well as our parks estate, which is obviously quite unique, and depots across the city. This is actually in the paper pack, so unfortunately, while it's not shown correctly on screen, it is available for you in the paper. But effectively, this is showing the makeup of our estate currently, and I think what you can see there, just to bring out some headlines, is that offices account for about 4%.
Sorry, Mark, just to let members know, that's on page 16. Just think, yeah. I know. Just imagine you've got colours in your mind. Yeah, page 16. Thank you, Mark.
No problem. Thank you. So yeah, but following the work that I've already mentioned, our office estate now only accounts for 4% of the buildings or assets that we have across the city, and you can see there that community hubs, community centres, and children's and families frontline buildings make up the vast proportion of the locality buildings. Okay. No problem. We're trying. So on the left-hand side there, there's a table showing how our locality estate is broken down. And for the purposes of the piece of work that we're talking about today, we're focusing on those that are highlighted there in the ambery colour, which in your report pack is probably the slightly darker colours if they're printed in black and white. And of that, we've got about 100 and just under 160 buildings that we're looking at there. I think also to put this into context, this map shows the spread of our assets right across the city. And again, just in headline terms, you can see that there's a real, I suppose, concentration of assets in inner areas. And then obviously, and no surprise here, as you get out of the city, the spread of assets reduces. But it is notable that there are some areas of the city that have already seen a loss of assets and therefore not necessarily got the right provision for service delivery now. And I think it's looking at how through this process we can help to try and address that. So as Angela said, we've been on a journey and a piece of work looking at how the estate is used, what that locality estate looks like, and over the last year. And the key headlines really are that there is massive underutilization. So across that locality estate, an assumption, and this is based on opening times, the amount of use, the groups that are using buildings, I suppose officers that are using spaces for office-based functions and meetings, that the utilisation is between 30 and 50% of our buildings, which is obviously a very inefficient use of resource. Now, for offices, we've been trying to target 80% utilisation. We're not quite there. But I think we want to try and apply that principle across to our wider estate as well. And on that basis, we're identifying an opportunity to potentially reduce the size of our locality estate by about 60%. As I've noted already, many of the buildings aren't fit for purpose. They provide a very poor customer journey. But there has been quite a lot of investment in spaces such as community hubs. Now, before I go on to what we're doing in terms of the review of the locality buildings and the principles that we're applying, I'll just bring Lee in just to talk about the locality service transformation work to give a bit of wider context.
Thanks, Mark. So I think it's fair to say the council's been on a journey for a number of years, at least 10 years, around locality working and how we develop that. So obviously we continue with that, and the bullet points on the screen are our ambitions, I suppose, around that next iteration of locality working in the city and how we deliver services in a much more integrated way. As Angela said at the beginning, there's the sort of process is, this is slightly behind the asset review in the sense that it's only something that is only just being worked up now. But fundamentally, the aim of the work is to, as it says on these, build on what we've already done. We have a long history that was reflected in the peer review as good work, and that we should go further with that. Obviously look at how we integrate and embed multidisciplinary teams, and I'll come back to that a bit in the context of buildings in a moment. Obviously focusing on the great work we do already around strength-based, building community wealth, etc., within communities, and how we can work with communities and enable them to work with us and for themselves in that sense. And a lot of this some of this has already started in the priority neighbourhoods through the development of local plans and things like that. I mean, the way it sort of will hopefully pan out is twofold. There's what we call sort of building based, which is where this work comes in, and that's about can we get more service delivery into our public facing buildings such as community hubs, community centres, children's centres, etc. Can we look at if we can rationalise and bring them in and provide a more rounded service? So we're doing work around sort of family hubs as an example of that. So that's sort of a key area where there's lots of joint working going to be happening on that. The other side of that is sort of non-building based, and that's where the multidisciplinary teams. So that's where services work in communities with families and individuals. Is there a way that we can do that better, more integrated, more efficient, etc.? But as I say, it is really at this stage relatively early doors. They are ambitions, and it's something that we'll be developing over the next 12 to 18 months.
Thanks, Lee. So just in terms of some principles that were set in, we want to take a corporate landlord approach, which effectively means that we manage buildings more corporately rather than them being sat with services. We want to see better quality but fewer buildings and them being used in a more flexible way, and as such they become multi-use. Single front door, that helps with navigation of services by members of the public and so on. And I think as such, it starts to pose some of the questions that are at the bottom of that slide around what does that mean? How can we work differently? And so hence why both processes go hand in hand. But clearly we're working at slightly different timescales. And I think this just really highlights what that might look like in terms of the council having a core building offer, a core locality, and then a locality offer, which is about those single front doors, but recognising that we're not the only building owners, property owners in the city, and there's actually a lot of third sector voluntary organisations, partners who have buildings that we could potentially make use of, which would help to sustain their organisations, maybe help to address some of those gaps that we've got elsewhere in the city, and also realise a rationalisation opportunity for the council. So Angela's touched on this. The way that we're approaching this is phase one, looking at buildings which are underutilised, where we can relocate existing service provision into nearby buildings that we've got the opportunity to do so. And that's something that we will be looking to bring forward over the next financial year. And then phase two is much more linked in with the review and transformation of locality services, which then informs a further phase of development of our estates and an understanding of exactly what's needed. Really important that we recognise the scale and complexity here, and obviously this is going right into the heart of communities, so it does become complex, and we do recognise that. But I think there's opportunities there for us to improve the offer in some places and for some communities by having a broader community space offer rather than just community centres. So that might open up a whole range of different buildings that we are currently shut at 5 p.m. in the evening, for instance, or limited open public access. And as I've already touched on, the partner and third sector buildings are going to be a really important component. Just to note, and I've already touched on this, but some exclusions to this work, we're not looking at anything that's residential in nature. So any properties that provide a residential function aren't part of this specific review. Equally, we're doing some separate work with parks to look at some of the club changing facilities and so on, where, you know, again, condition issues, but we need to find a sustainable way forward, and depots, as I've outlined already. I suppose just to note what happens to our buildings for context when we do release them. I think many of you will be aware of the capital receipt programme, where we sell properties on the open market, and that's one of the key divestment approaches that we take. We do, though, before getting to that point, look at whether we can or whether we've got a requirement within the council for priority programmes and projects to take forward sites. So, for example, council housing new build or learning places. And we've also got community asset transfer as an opportunity. And I think it's recognising that is a part of the toolkit. But it is very, there's a lot of resource commitment required from communities to take anything forward, and I think it's just recognising it's not necessarily the silver bullet to this, but nevertheless it's something that we want to explore as we start to look at which buildings might need to come forward for release. So just in terms of next steps, and then open up for final comments and questions, what we need to do is really come up with a programme of activity, identify buildings and how progress that review process. and then identify a programme of activity, because one of the things that we're really mindful of is what we don't want to do is necessarily, it might be unavoidable in some cases, but shutting the door of a building, putting it in void management, and then it taking some time to move on to a next stage. And I think that's recognising the impact on communities that can have in terms of, you know, antisocial behaviour or the issues facing void properties. Also a value issue and a cost issue for the council. It can be sometimes more costly to put something into void because of those risks than running them on a minimal level. And equally, if we're wanting to sell those assets, the day we come out of them is probably when the assets at its highest value because of, again, the risks that I've talked about there. We're going to adopt the same principles that we've used in previous rounds of rationalisation, which is a multidisciplinary cross directorate team to support this, so involving colleagues in HR, comms, asset management, facilities management, etc. We really do recognise the need to engage, and we haven't got all the answers around that at the moment. Clearly there's going to be ward member engagement, stakeholder engagement. Some of that will be undertaken by services. Some obviously, when we're talking about moving, how buildings move forward and how sites move forward, will need to come from within my team. I think it's also worth noting that we will have to invest in our retained buildings, so that there might need to be some investment to allow services to relocate in the first instance, and that's recognised. That's probably going to have to be fairly modest investment given the financial challenges that we've got, but also then look into a longer term investment programme to address any backlog maintenance and how that dovetails into the backlog maintenance programme. I think the other final two areas that are really important to this is looking at what that community spaces approach looks like and how that functions in the right way. So how we can, and already having some discussions with colleagues in IDS around how that might develop into an online booking system so that it's more accessible than the current community listings approach potentially. But also how we can make that work and maximise that, recognising that obviously community groups have specific requirements, but also council services will have specific requirements for those spaces. So, I mean, that's the end of the presentation. I suppose in summary, this is very much, I suppose we're at a fairly early stage, and we recognise that we're coming here, that we're at an early stage. You know, clearly we will be taking through that review process, looking at the buildings, and then be able to talk in more detail around that in the future as we've got a clear review as to what that then looks like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for that. Just before I bring in other members, on page 16, the same chart that you were trying to show us on the screen in paragraph 8, where you referenced the usage of locality buildings, how did you calculate that? So your 30 to 50% utilization, how did you calculate? What indices did you use?
So, good question. It's really difficult because obviously buildings are open for different amounts of time, and equally because they are used in the localities, you've got, take community centres for instance, you've got some regular bookings that take place, but then you've got some ad hoc bookings. So effectively the calculation has been taking the number of hours that a building is open and then the number of hours it is used. Now clearly you're then looking at, well, how much of a building is in use at that time, because take a community centre, there could be a couple of community rooms in there, only one might be used or whatever. So we're not saying at all that it's an absolute indices that you can that is nailing it down to a particular percentage, but it's a broad approach that we've taken to indicate that that is the utilisation. I mean, I think the community centre element is much more easily definable because of the booking system that's in place. It's probably a bit more ambiguous when we start looking at things like children's centres, because some of those, as you'll be aware, they're not open all day, every day. And the very nature of some of the services that are offered are drop-in. So again, it's difficult to really, in an office, you can count the number of desks and say, how many people have you got, how many desks? With community buildings, it's a little bit harder, but so that's why we've said 30 to 50%. But we do have a little bit more science behind that, albeit it's not entirely clear as to exactly where that sits.
Okay, and is this breakdown of different wards as well? Have you got all of that data? Each of the different community hubs that we have in each ward, so you've got all of that. Fab, thank you. Okay, members, over to you. Yes, Councillor Buckley.
Thank you for that presentation. Is there a target for the number of buildings to be sold off, or is there a target for savings to be made, and if so, by what date? And also, just speaking parochially, we only have in All Woodley, apart from the library, which is now the hub, we only have one other building in the ward, which is currently out of action, which is 3 miles away from the hub. So it's a completely different set of people. And I just wondered, you needn't go into detail here, but when can we expect some progress there? And the reason I ask these questions is because what we don't want is lots of buildings boarded up, shuttered and left, because the Treetops has already been a year like this.
Okay, so I suppose in terms of your first question, Councillor, in around timescales and targets and so on, there's no financial targets directly attached to this at this point in time, although there's a recognition that there are financial savings that can be achieved through the release of buildings. I think, as I said in my presentation, we think the scope, subject to the locality service transformation work and what that might look like ultimately, there's potential scope to reduce from that 157 buildings, 60% of them being released, and that's just based on the information we've got at this point in time. And like I say, that's not set in stone. Absolutely accept your point that you made and around not having things in void management. I think I covered that in the presentation I gave, and I suppose recognising in terms of Treetops that you mentioned specifically and we've spoken about separately, clearly that's got its own issues. It wasn't something that was being scheduled for closure. That had structural issues which ended up leading to its closure. But yeah, recognising that we've got to find an outcome for things in a quick way and move at pace rather than leaving things closed.
Any supplementary question from that, Councillor Buckley?
Well, I just wonder if I could press you on dates and by what date you expect to have this wrapped up substantially.
So like I say, very much work in progress. It's going to be delivered in the phases that we talked about. So there will be, I think we will have a first pass of sites at the beginning of next year. We will then look at that review continuing and probably further passive sites later on in the year, and then I think you can expect the same probably in 2025 for the 25-26 financial year, and then potentially into 26-27 as well. I think it's very difficult to define it. We know that there's that first phase that we will be bringing sites forward at the beginning of next year, but I think it's very difficult to be able to nail anything else on because we are so much informed by the review of the service delivery itself.
And just to add to that, and I think it's fair to say in terms of the Changing the Workplace programme, that's been ongoing for 13 years. In asset management, we are continuously looking about making sure that our building footprint meets our service need. So in a way, there probably won't be any end to this, because we will be constantly reshaping our service and therefore reshaping our building needs. But as Mark says, we will probably bring it through in tranches. One, where we know there's early delivery. Two, where it's informed with how the services are going to be delivered.
Thank you. Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. That's very informative. There's a couple of questions that occurred to me while you were speaking and from reading the documents. In paragraph 18 of your report, there's you mentioned leisure centres, museums, galleries. So I guess when we think of museums and galleries, we immediately think of the big ones in the city centre. That's not part of the locality estate, obviously. But on the subject of leisure centres, it set me thinking. My ward colleagues and I did actually borrow a room in the Kirkstall Leisure Centre to conduct a meeting with a local business owner a while back. I'm just wondering what we are doing, or what can we do more can we do to get the most out of room hire opportunities, and whose job it would be, because it strikes me that somebody with the skill set for doing the best, making the best of that role is not necessarily the people who are in buildings like community hubs full time and their primary responsibilities delivering services. That maybe there should be an element of centralisation there. I'll be grateful for any thoughts on that. Also allied to that, there's a small hub in my ward in Hawksworth. Went to visit them recently. It's very well kitted out for the services it needs to provide on the ground floor. It's compared, well, I suppose it was previously a shop, and it had been a community centre. I do apologise. And it was, it's like the size of a large house, basically, so not big by the standards of a public building. The upstairs is up a flight of stairs, not accessible in modern terms. And I'm just wondering if there's any sort of way we can make use of that kind of part of the estate for anything other than just storage space, which is pretty empty at the moment. But I think the people who work there at the moment sort of envisage that for being the sort of being its role. So I'll be glad for your thoughts on that, please.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So your first point around leisure centres and I suppose the booking of spaces. So we've already done quite a lot of work with Active Leeds, looking at how leisure centres are utilised, and I think it's fair to say there's peak times, which are often evenings and weekends, and actually during the day, some of the spaces, particularly the sports hall provision, is often not as well used as it could be. So what we've been exploring is, well, actually how, and this is before we've obviously understood the service transformation work, but is there an opportunity, for example, for some service delivery to take place in leisure centres? So some of the activities, for instance, that maybe take place in children's centres could actually take place in leisure centres, and that then could open up other opportunities for those service users to engage with other services and facilities and so on. So it's absolutely critical part of the solution. I think just picking up on your point about museums and galleries as well, it's looking at how those buildings can actually play an increased role within the community. So I know some of those museums already very much front onto the community and are used by local groups and so on. But how can we boost that further? And obviously some of that is, then picking up your second point, restricted by the buildings to some degree and access and so on. So it might not be a solution everywhere, but looking at how that can be achieved. In terms of the booking element and how that is best managed, I think looking as I said, looking at that online system is going to be a digital system, is going to be a way of trying to make spaces more available, more accessible, not necessarily going through a reception desk in a community hub, having it online. Now, like I say, very early doors, we've had some conversations with colleagues in IDS about how that can be achieved. But what it has to do, it's got to be inward looking in terms of being able to allow services to be able to make use of those spaces and book them and appropriately, but also outward facing so that it's an easy system for anyone else to be able to book and pay for spaces. So and linked with that, obviously it's looking at what that pricing approach might be, how that links with the existing community lettings pricing, etc., and any potential need to change that. So very much work in progress.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just bring in Eve now, please.
Yeah, so Leeds Museums and Galleries is part of my portfolio. And last year we undertook a commercial review of the whole service, which looked at some of these exact points about areas for improvement in terms of how we offer our spaces, how we can organise our services and skill up our staff to be much more commercially aware. And there was lots of really helpful feedback. And the Museums and Galleries team is putting in place a plan for each site, working with the principal keeper for each site to be able to look at that and across the board. So hopefully we can join some of that work together with the broader work that's going on across service areas as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'll take questions in twos. Councillor Flynn and then Councillor Isaac before.
Thanks, Abigail. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you in full glorious Technicolor instead of on screen. Just a couple of things, really. I know this review has been going on, or the estate review has been going on for a number of years, and it's been given added sort of impetus by the budget gap. First couple of questions are regarding service to the public, which really is not your bag. Both you and Lee talked or mentioned this is being done in conjunction with the review of locality-based services, which is being looked at by another scrutiny board, which is not very helpful. It would be much better, I think, if we could see the results on the service to the public, as well as the pure sort of economic and whatever, sort of other benefits you want to get out of it. So not quite sure what we can do about that, but I think without knowing the effect on locality-based services, it's difficult for us to give a sort of a view. Paragraph 32 talks about risks, but that's based essentially around the build review itself, not about service to the public. So I think I'd like a bit more information on that. Obviously not from you, but from other officers, if at all possible. And secondly, more to do with the budget gap. And maybe working from home doesn't have such a dramatic effect on the locality buildings, but how much of what you're depending or what you're hoping to do depends on working from home, if anyone ever comes back to work, God help us all. And capital receipts are going down fairly rapidly and will continue to go down fairly rapidly over the medium-term financial strategy. What's the sort of effect, what effect that going to have on the sort of the gap, as it were, the budget gap?
Thank you, Councillor Finn. And I think from what you were saying, some of the work might be cross-working with Councillor Galton's scrutiny. So at some point, maybe we could look into that in the new municipal year, but we'll come back to that. Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that informative presentation. A couple of specific questions relating to assets in my ward, but which I think have more general hopefully have more general relevance. The first is one that I know you're familiar with, which is the Welcome Inn Opal site in Cookridge. Initially, when they took over what was a kind of empty community pub, they looked at getting an extended lease. And I think the benefit of that is it allows them to invest in the building. And for those who don't know, they're a community institution who do a lot of really good work in our area. For whatever reason, that extended lease wasn't possible, and they're now negotiating to extend it. But I wonder if is there any way of looking at whether, we can by default offer longer leases for some of these organizations? Would that, I appreciate there may be some risk in that, but would that reduce any of our kind of legal overheads and allow them to have a more kind of sustainable future and invest more in the long term? So that's one question. The other is just about the national situation in part. So on my street, actually, there's an empty primary school. It's been empty for a few years, Bentley Lane Primary. My understanding is that there's a lot of kind of national bureaucratic barriers to us disposing of that site. I know that Councillor Pryor spends a lot of time lobbying various secretaries of state. Is there anything that needs to change nationally? Is there anything we can lobby on nationally to allow us to have more control and flexibility over what we do with our assets? Perhaps particularly for education assets, but more generally as well. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
I'll pick up the schools one first. So any building that was used for education with the DFE, if we cease using it for education, it has to be kept for 8 years afterwards. In that period, it can be, if we want to use it for something else, if we want to dispose of it, we need written permission from the Secretary of State, whichever one might be in that day, which obviously kind of adds a slight challenge. The Secretary of State obviously looks after thousands, tens of thousands of schools, and is usually reluctant to do this. And it's true whether it's kind of a bit of land from a school or an entire school building. Once those 8 years are up, if another provider, be it a free school, an academy, anyone else, hasn't decided they want to use it for education purposes, it's then treated the same as any other council asset. So I don't know the specifics of the Bentley. I don't know how many years in we are on that one.
Yes, and there's confusion because it's been used as a temporary school as well, and so it's when the clock starts and stops, and so yeah, it is a complex area. We have been exploring how we can potentially accelerate some of those releases quicker, and how we might be able to engage with the DFE in a slightly different way. But as Councillor Pryor notes, anything that is being looked at or considered for disposal tends to be at the bottom of the list. If we're looking at doing some other educational letting, then they obviously look at things in a prioritised approach. But it's nevertheless, it is very much in our mind and our consciousness that we need to try and find solutions for sites such as that. I think the DFE are aware of the issues that causes locally where we do get stalled sites. I think it's worth saying that the buildings that we're talking about as part of the review coming forward won't be affected by that Section 77 Education Act issue. It may be that individual buildings, if they've been invested in with grant funding, there may be some clawback issues that we need to consider, but that's part of the due diligence that we'll undertake on a building by building basis to understand that risk. I think the first point that you picked up was around that community leasing and the timescales for community leasing. We don't have a fixed approach. We don't. It tends to be dependent on the ask of community organisations and the business cases that are brought forward. In terms of community asset transfers, we do want to try and bring forward a more standardised approach, and we're looking at how we can make that an easier process to navigate, both for community organisations, but equally for the council, because I think we've got some really good examples of community asset transfers, but we've also got a lot of experience of inquiries that come in that are quite premature maybe, and maybe focus too much on the building rather than how that building is going to be used. So the business cases are sometimes not as strong as they could be, and that makes it very difficult then to be able to move forward. So I think recognising, Councillor, the case that you raised specifically, we're clearly looking at that opportunity to extend the lease, and support organisations where we can to allow them to access that funding where they are delivering important services locally, and then taking good good care and investing in the building that they've got under that lease.
Thank you. Oh, you want to come in? Thanks.
I was just going to pick up Councillor Flynn's comments as well, if that's okay. So firstly, I'll start with remote working. We've been on a remote working journey for a long time, and obviously accelerated through how remote working was really adopted through necessity initially, and then actually through productivity. As we came out of the pandemic, we have a number of colleagues who access a lot of third-party buildings, so certainly in the health sector. And if I focus just on how will remote working impact the localities review, it's less so about people working from home who are office-based who can do. It's more about those peripatetic colleagues who need that access to welfare, to drop in, who are out in the communities. So it will change how we use buildings, but it's a very different change as we've seen in our office estate. So that would be the first point. I'm very happy to follow any of that up. And then the second on the capital receipts programme, the capital receipts programme has been around for 25 plus years, and it's been a really important part of how we raise funds to cross-fund other parts of our revenue provision. And we can only sell things once, so it is a dwindling, a dwindling income. We have a 5-year programme, and we are constantly reviewing our estate to say, well, what goes in year 6, 7, and 8? And it's fair to say that as we divest of properties and we've no longer an operational use, a consideration is what do we then make use of? And selling that building and using that income is very much part of that consideration.
Just a quick one, the working from home bit. Are you effectively saying that that's had very little effect, if any, on the work that you're doing in terms of this particular review, not the overall building review?
I would say we've considered our office portfolio, and of that, we've got a number of offices that are actually based out in the localities, and we've already addressed over the last 4 years our office portfolio. The latest is obviously the release of Adams Court, where we had quite a lot of surplus stock. So whilst there will be an element within the localities, it certainly isn't the main driver.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll come back to you both. I've had 4 others waiting. So Councillor Gavani, then Councillor Lay, then Councillor Buckley, and then Councillor Hamilton. So we'll take them in twos if you don't mind. So Councillor Gavani first.
Thank you, Chair. You've obviously, I think you've got amongst these ambers, you've got some ideas of what buildings you're looking at. Have the councillors for those wards where those buildings sit already been approached and are being talked to? And specifically on children's centres, and I sit on the advisory board for the Horsforth, Headingley and Island Wood Children's Centre, all 3 of which share school premises. Where you've got that sort of scenario, and I'm not saying this is going to happen with any of those, but where you've got that sort of shared premises scenario, what's being looked at in those areas? If you could cover that, please.
Councillor Lay, and then you can respond, please.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I want to start really with just a few examples from my own ward, and then I've got some broader questions for citywide. So when I think about what's happened in my community, first thing I think of is Otley Civic Centre and its closure. But a positive side of that was, and it comes back to something you wrote that was on one of your slides, Mark, was that there were community groups in using council facilities and were paying a council letting fee. Those community groups found third-party providers, either local sports groups, for example, rugby club or the churches. And those community groups therefore got an income from those community groups now having their services in their buildings rather than the civic centre. Then I think about things like Yeadon Town Hall, one of the few that you reference what you would class as probably successful community asset transfers, very much driven by one individual who had a vision for it. And is doing a fantastic job, to be fair, and that has really reinvigorated the community from not just the building's use, but he's been able to access funding for building improvements. He's been able to support the community with the Christmas lights, etc. And then I think about the care home in Silver Lake, Suffolk Court, which was repurposed into a recovery unit, recovery hub. So there's been a number of changes in the ward which can happen and doesn't necessarily result in a loss of service, just a loss of a building. On the wider, I just wanted to really ask about, and I've got them here because I'm having technical problems on here. Given the reduction in locality buildings, I know there's more to be said, I suspect, or more to be understood about how the negative impact of loss of buildings will on a community, particularly those communities that are underserved or have particular socio-economic needs, and utilization of 80% is a high watermark. And I suspect those communities, and lots of people actually, are probably listening in thinking, hang on, are we about to get rid of everything? Because 190 sounds a lot, but we're a huge authority right across from the M6, A1, right across to North Yorkshire and Bradford. So there sounds a lot, but we're a huge community, a huge local authority metro. The other thing I wanted to ask about was how are we going to engage with those communities? It needs to be an engagement that is a listening engagement, not a fait accompli, really, in my view, because there will be a lot of big P and small p politics play out. And finally, if I may, there is just one third question. How does the plan for reducing buildings align with the long-term sustainability goals, particularly as demand for community services are likely to get greater as council resources get smaller? And you made reference to ABCDs, asset-based community development, etc. Most of those organisations come to the council as its first port of call and say, can you find us a property? So I've got a men's group in Otley that is looking for somewhere that has got peppercorn rent, etc. And this council has historically supported that. Not that particular case, but that sort of endeavour. And I just worry that we're now moving away from that, and that our communities will suffer as a consequence.
Thank you, Mark. I do know you've got a good number of questions to answer from both of them, but on the second to the last question from Councillor Lays, just to ensure in terms of capturing the views of our community and obviously our constituencies to make sure that the decisions we're making on this estate, how does it relate to our equality, of course, diversity and inclusion of our city's ambition? So it'll be nice to hear from you on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Shall I just start with that one and then move back through to the others? So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think engagement is going to be an important part of this, and it will be different in the different phases that we're talking about, I think, and in different localities. I think we can't just approach it as a one-size-fits-all approach because, you know, when we're looking at community spaces in certain wards, I think as members have highlighted, there might not be something else nearby, and that clearly then informs any recommendations that we might bring forward about specific buildings. So I think that's an important point to make. In terms of the engagement itself, that will be something that we will need to scope out, and it's something that we will be working with services, the frontline services, or communities colleagues, for instance, to ensure that that's right. And again, it's probably a little too early in the process to be able to say exactly how that's going to work, but I think we do recognise that we've got to go through the right process. We've got to consider the equality, how we make those decisions, and what that engagement looks like in terms of the engagement, that making it an engaging process where it needs to be. Obviously, for some buildings, it might not be as appropriate and necessary to do that. It depends on the use of those buildings. So I think we will approach it on that sort of individual basis, where we need to. Does that answer your, I suppose, question there, Councillor Castle? Yeah. So in terms of the other questions posed, I think I've probably covered the first point raised around engagement there. Where we've got shared premises, which I think was the question, particularly around community children's centres that might be on school sites and so on. That's clear that any lease agreements or licenses that might be in place will inform this process, and that's licenses and leases of property in, as well as leases and licenses out. So where we are occupying school space, we will obviously need to have conversations and discussions with children's services, the school themselves, around any changes around that space. But equally, that has to be in the context of the other assets that are in that locality, and what the scope is for some sort of combining of facilities. So I think we are mindful that in terms of schools and particularly children's centres, of which there's a number in school premises, that is probably the best solution ultimately. And actually, how can they potentially provide more of a hub for some of the other surrounding services that are delivered by children's and families? But I think that's all subject to the work that's going to come through the service transformation conversations and proposals that ultimately come forward. In terms of the second set of questions, thank you for referencing places like Eden Town Hall. Yes, it is one of our successful community asset transfers, and I think you also referenced the opportunities that are created through closing buildings. So what can be seen as a negative can actually turn into a positive in some cases. I think the point around wider sustainability, I mean, that covers a whole host of different things, and again, probably refers back in terms of service delivery to the service transformation conversations that need to take place, and how that then informs our estate. But I think one of the key things to know in that wider sustainability context, we recognise that we want to reduce our carbon footprint, and obviously our buildings are a significant contributor to that. So actually, if we can reduce our estate and focus on those more sustainable buildings, the buildings that we can that will be less costly and less impactful to heat and run, then that's obviously a positive, and that's one of the drives that we've got through this programme.
Thanks. Just to pick up on the impact question from a service transformation, because I think it's important. Interestingly, I think the assessment of impact won't just be on the building. We'll almost have to look at all the impact from a service by service perspective, where we are looking to transform the way. So if we're looking at putting more services into buildings, we're going to have to look at the impact of that for each of those services, as well as the building going forward. So I think it is something for us to take away and think about how we do that, because it isn't just about the impact of, potentially if you move into here, what's the impact on that building there? Because we need to understand potentially an impact from integrating more as well. So I think it's important we take that away. But I think the other thing to think from my perspective in terms of service transformation, this isn't about whilst we have a target around savings and or an aim to reduce the estate, it can only be done if it makes sense from a service delivery perspective. And there will be some examples of where we have to put assets in, and Hawksworth was mentioned earlier. That was a great example of where there was nothing in that community and we put a hub in there so that there was a physical place, because we know that where there aren't, that can have an impact, a negative impact as well. So it's a really good point, and I think one for us to take away to understand. I think we need to take a broader view of understanding impact from this work.
Thank you. No, just before you come in, talking about the transformation and the impact, if you look at your presentation on page 17, paragraph 12, where you were mentioning the reviews are in parallel with each other, where I think we're looking for reassurance that the effect it will have on the delivery, the service delivery. I think I'm just hoping that they actually complement one another. I think that's the kind of reassurance that we're looking for.
And Chair, I can pick that up, and that was the final point. Is your questions are totally the reasons why we've split this out into 2 phases, and this has to be driven by service transformation. This isn't a building approach, but at the same time, we know that we've got such underutilization in our buildings that what do we do safely as a phase 1 to make sure that we're managing our estate down safely, whilst our services are considering what does next generation of service transformation and delivery look like. And that's why they've got a 12-month parallel and will come in, and the buildings piece of work will report into the Localities Transformation Board, which will be chaired by James Rogers. So I'm hoping we can give you the assurance now that we've split it out so that we didn't sit and do nothing, because there are things that we can be done, but equally we don't want to go too far and undermine safe delivery.
Okay, thank you. I'll take 3 more questions and then we'll bring this agenda item to a wrap. Okay, 4. That's because you're sobbing, so I'll let you with that one, all right? Okay, Councillor Buckley, then Councillor Hamilton, and then Councillor Firth, and then Councillor Thompson, and that will be it. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. So, on page 19, at paragraph 23, it mentions community asset transfers could provide scope for communities to take over the running of buildings. However, this will only be possible with buildings which meet current minimum energy efficiency standards. This currently requires an EPC rating of E, but is expected to increase to a B by the end of the decade. Now, I've no idea what this all means, but it seems to be another bar to retaining a building. That's the first thing. And the second thing is a bit of a googly, actually. On your presentation originally, I think there was a list of core assets, including the town hall. Well, since electoral services moved from the town hall into the civic hall, I haven't been there. I haven't been there for 2 years. What goes on there? What goes on in the town hall?
My question is regarding the red building which can be released in phase 1. For example, in Wetherby, there's that building, that asset, where the services have been moved into the library hub. So will that building be included in there for release dispose of? Because it is costing, having it there with hardly anything in it. So I hope you'll be talking to councillors with regards to the phase 1, with regards where buildings are to be disposed of and released. So, that building's been there for some time. Is it functional? As far as I know, when I did the community hubs, the library was upgraded, etc., and it was moved out. So why are we still keeping it, or is it on the list for disposal?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for the late arrival. And also, I think that the Wetherby and Support the Elderly are still within the one-stop centre, but I look forward to the discussion that come forward. I just want to ask about obviously we've got a number of budget proposals brought forward and under consultation at the moment. Can I ask two questions on that point? Have all of the buildings on the current proposals for release been engaged with, as there are other measures, for example, parking, where ward members haven't been consulted in a different department? And also, in terms of how many of them were on the amber list or may have not been on the list at all? And at the third point, how can we limit, especially given the current housing and property market, losing significant amounts of money compared to what we could have earned in a time when maybe we didn't have to rationalise the estate so quickly? Thank you.
Thank you. Just very briefly, it's really encouraging to hear that looking to smooth out the process around community asset transfers. It seems sometimes that organisations are caught in a vicious cycle because they're on a short-term lease, so they can't access the funding to invest in buildings. So then the building deteriorates, or they can't do what they would like to that might improve, for example, energy efficiency. Yeah, we have a great example in our ward in Rawdon Community Library that's really thriving, but we know there are others who'd like to follow that example and take buildings on. Also, whether some of the leases are due for review and some of the community groups are struggling with that process as well. And then an encouragement to link up with health services, especially in the outer areas where some clinics and other services are hard for families to access. So hearing the talk about family hubs is really encouraging. Thank you. And then just one challenge, Micklefield House, as you're all too aware, has been a long-term challenge since it was void and then sold and then unsold and then sold again. And it does seem to be improving, but just keen to prevent that kind of thing happening again where possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try and remember the questions and be as succinct as I can. So I suppose starting with Councillor Buckley's question around EPC and the jargon and so on. So for a building or any part of a property to be let on a commercial basis, which includes community asset transfers or community uses, at this point in time, they have to meet the EPC, Energy Performance Certificate rating of an E. So that's when you're selling your house, that's probably bringing it back to something that people might understand. When you're selling your house, you have to have an energy performance assessment, which is then part of the pack of information which goes to your solicitors and so on. So it's that same assessment that needs to be done for commercial property to be let. Now, at the moment, that's an EPC of an E. And it's recognizing that some properties in our estate will not meet that rating, so we wouldn't be able to then enter into leases. And this is but part of the issue when community organisations that might already be in buildings come and want a new lease, that actually we wouldn't be compliant in issuing a new lease in some cases. So it's a consideration, and then understanding what the level of investment is required to be able to bring it up to a particular standard. Now, while not confirmed, there is a process in place through which it is anticipated that that E rating will increase, and I suppose the understanding within the sector and the industry is that would be targeting a B in 2030. Now that's quite an ask, particularly so for when you think of a developer bringing forward an office building in the city centre and so on. It's easy to do. You've got a big return potentially. You're bringing a new build forward. It's quite easy to achieve that rating. But again, going back to some of our buildings that we've got, with all the will in the world, they will not meet an EPC of B. Some will, and I think that's the assessment that we've got to undertake in terms of supporting or promoting opportunities for community asset transfer where we can. Then clearly there's an opportunity for communities to express an interest then. However, I think it's recognising that the council wouldn't be in a position to put that money in, so it would have to form part of that community asset transfer business case that is brought by community organisations. Also, I suppose just linked to that, it's the backlog maintenance. So again, none of these buildings will come in perfect condition with guarantees or warranties or anything of that nature. So it's recognising by and the recognition from community organisations that they're taking the building as seen effectively, and that will then require some investment. And what we are really mindful of is that if we try and transfer properties that have too much investment need, then that is putting communities potentially under a duress, really, and not able to effectively deliver a viable and sustainable business case moving forward. So that's the careful consideration around the opportunity for community asset transfer that we need to work through. In terms of the town hall, we maybe come back to it. Eve might want to say a few words, but I think that it's worth saying the town hall has had a range of uses over the years. Obviously, office uses, as you pointed to, Councillor Buckley, but it's also a big event space, a really notable event space. And albeit it has been closed because there's works taking place to the building to improve the offer, and that will come back online and be that major event space for the city that it has been historically. So you're probably right in saying what's happening there now. Nothing other than works taking place internally, but there and there's a capital programme budget to support those works that's already been agreed at executive board previously. I think just in terms of the list of buildings, that is still very much being worked on, and the point raised around Wetherby, clearly it's in the mix as are all the buildings that are in localities. Clearly, as Councillor Firth then added, it is occupied to not in its entirety by organisations that are leasing space. Again, that's part of the consideration that we need to go through in determining what the future is for buildings. But absolutely every building of that nature and beyond are under consideration. In terms of engagement with ward members, as I pointed to earlier, it's a little bit too early for us to have done that as yet, but we will be designing that and working that through as we start to understand what that list of potential buildings and that phasing starts to look like. So we will be bringing that back. And I think your second point was around maximising the capital receipt effectively from the sales and consideration of market conditions, which is a really good point and links back to making sure that we have that phased approach to releasing any properties that we do release. What we don't want to be doing is releasing a number of properties or bringing a number of properties in one part of the city to the market at the same time, so we get competition between them. It's looking at how we can bring a mix of types of properties right across the city at different points so that we do, as far as we can, maximise that value, but also recognising the revenue cost savings that we need to make and the potential burden should we not, or should we put something in void management for longer than necessary. And then I think the final comments from Councillor Thompson were around the health sector and well, I suppose Micklefield House, first of all, and obviously this is part of us learning from experiences in the past and then putting that learning and into our future work and best practice. So do recognise the issues and that have been associated with that property, and we will try and, where we can, avoid them. But obviously that was down to market conditions and particular purchasers' interests at the time. In terms of working with health partners, we do, there's the One Public Estate programme, which operates at a West Yorkshire level, where we have engagement right across the public estate. We also have within Leeds the Strategic Estates Board, of which the council is a member, but it's also primarily the health sector and the various parts of the health service that are represented on there. So we very much engaged through that group, and we are in discussions about how we can potentially broaden that group further so that it becomes not less of a health focus, but that it's got a broader focus on the wider public estate, including, and I know they're not public institutions in the same way, but including the education sector, so the universities, for instance, because they have an offer in the city as well, and a number of campuses in many cases. So yes, certainly in terms of that partnership working, it's very much key to what we're doing.
Just to pick up on some of Councillor Buckley's points, the EPC changes are a national change, so it's something, it's a change the government's making, so it's something we're not just dealing with here in Leeds. Community groups across the country are facing that, and it is providing a real challenge. I think a lot of groups are looking to get rid of assets because they just can't keep up with the necessary changes that need to be made. On the town hall, I'm glad to hear you've not been in a couple of years, given it's been closed. It's a huge amount of work being done, so it's changes, it's necessary repairs, it's changes to accessibilities, a few changes to make sure that we can increase revenue once it does reopen. We've refurbished the organ, which is kind of a once in a generation piece of work. You can sponsor an organ pipe if you wish. It's on the website, and once that's open, I think we're hoping that'll bring in around 900k a year, I think is our estimated revenue from that once the necessary repair works have been done.
Okay, Councillor.
Can I just say, with regards to the backlog of repairs, why do we wait until this in such bad condition? For example, in your house, if something needs doing, you do it, don't you? We don't wait, and then until it's at the very end where it's going to cost more. Why does the council keep doing that with buildings? Why our backlog is so bad?
Councillor Flynn. Remember, I did say yeah. Are you sure? You're happy? Good. Okay.
Thank you. I'll take the backlog question. I think it simply comes down to the size of our estate and our limited budgets that we have to put repairs and maintenance in, which has been ongoing probably for the last decade, which then builds up, quite a big problem, where we're facing now. Clearly, there are choices in where we take budgets from. And I think perhaps taking budgets from the estate has meant that we're now facing quite a lot of challenges. And at the same time, obviously, the standards for how we keep our buildings are increasing, as Councillor Pryor said, in terms of national government standards.
Okay, I was going to give you all a 5-minute break, but I've at 11:55, so I've got 2 minutes, and I know Councillor Firth wanted to come back, and there was one more, somebody else, Councillor Lay. So 30 seconds each. That's it.
Thank you again, Chair, for indulging my thoughts and thinking. So yes, just on obviously Councillor Firth's point, if we look at a very recent example, Rothwell Town Hall, I believe that got half of what it was hoped to get, that it would have got 2 years ago. So that point about market conditions being but my substantive question really is, within the team, do you have enough resource to be able to deliver this rather large project? Because we are all, for equivalency, if I take parks as an example, and play parks, we give them a shed load of money, and then we would have to wait a number of years for our playground to be designed and built out, because they have a relatively small team of people who do the play parks. Are we going to have the same problem with yourselves, in that you won't have the resources to deliver what is really a large project?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for indulging me as well. I just wanted to ask a very quick question, which is about the release of assets, but also repairing them before we sell them to get the maximised value about them. The reason I say that is that obviously the scars of East Lodge at Temple Newsham, where the price of repairs seemed to keep on going up, and there was no valid explanation of why. And also I understand that with the sale now proposed for Crossgates Library, that no repairs have been done since it was closed for refurbishment in April 2022, and no money has been spent on it. And I just wanted to ask, could we get some more information on how we rationalise making sure we make every effort to get as much money for the property asset that we can, even with a tiny bit of work. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take those in turn. In terms of resources, I think the biggest risk on all our programs at the minute is the resources to deliver, and that is certainly on our register, which is why we've phased this, so that in what we're delivering, we're certain we can do it in a timely manner and we don't over program. Clearly, if more resources come available, then we can relook at the program we can go at. The second point about maximising value, clearly the earlier we can choose to release a property, the more certainty we have on value. And our markets are cyclical. So you'll know from your own residential market, values change daily, monthly, yearly. And we're in quite a volatile time at the minute. So the more certainty we can give, the better. And certainly when we think about our best consideration obligation, we're always weighing up the investment needed and the time taken to achieve that investment versus the price that can be realised on that day. So we structure lots of sales, whether it be conditional on planning, and then that can take time, whether they're unconditional or whether we want real certainty on timing of completion, and that's when we might use an auction. So that consideration is undertaken on every time we consider what's the best use or the best method on how we're going to sell a property.
Okay, thank you very much, officers and Councillor Pryor, for that agenda item. I'm sure members, if you've still got any further questions, we have emails and I'm certain officers will definitely respond to ourselves. So I'm giving you all now a little comfort break. Can you please come back at 12:05? Please have something to drink and eat. Thank you.
Well done.
Okay. Right, agenda item number 8, business support in Leeds. Thank you again to Councillor Pryor and even, I believe, Bill. You're all here. So I believe you introduced yourselves earlier, didn't you? Oh, no, you didn't. All right, I'll get to your bit. No problem. So this item was actually requested by members at the start of the municipal year, where we did ask for a review of the support the council provides to businesses in the city, given the importance of encouraging productivity within the context of our inclusive growth ambitions. So can I kindly ask the executive member again to introduce himself in case people are just joining us for this agenda item, and the rest of your team. Thank you very much.
I'm Jonathan Pryor. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
I'm Eve Roodhouse. I'm Chief Officer for Culture and Economy at the Council.
I'm Phil Cole, Head of Business Support from the Council.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to do a little context and then I'm going to hand over to Phil to highlight the key points in the report. Members will be aware that the Inclusive Growth Strategy was relaunched for the period of 2023 to 2030 at the end of September. And the Inclusive Growth Strategy has 3 themes of people, place and productivity. And within that, there are 9 big ideas. And one of the ideas under the productivity theme is helping businesses and organisations to become more productive and thrive in the face of change. Now, with such a significant proportion of our business base being SMEs, it's really important that there is support to those SMEs in order to achieve that. And that support is provided through the West Yorkshire Combined Authority and through ourselves, and sometimes in partnership as set out in the report. And what Phil's going to do is just to give you a sense of the services that we currently provide, and then we'll take some questions from you all.
Thanks, Eve, for that. Yes, in terms of the services that we currently provide, our main service to existing businesses is the business growth service, which we actually deliver through a hybrid model with the Combined Authority and the other West Yorkshire districts. So we have a hub and spoke model in terms of delivery, where we have a hub based at the Combined Authority, which provides sort of overall management and administration of the growth service, a website and an inquiry hub. And then we have spokes, which are done by the districts, which is basically a team of growth managers who are active with a portfolio of clients across the city. Our current team consists of 4.5 staff, and over the last 6 months, we've engaged with 168 businesses, and we've got some case studies around some of the businesses that we've engaged with in Appendix 1. Also in the report, we talk about our key account management service, which is our service for larger businesses, those employing more than 250 staff. And it's important that the council engages with those larger businesses because they're often important for the council for a whole host of different reasons in terms of influencing the economy, but also getting some of those businesses to actually contribute to our wider agenda. And we have a couple of staff who actually work on that particular service. And that was, I think, particularly important during the pandemic when we had, regular Zoom calls with the top 100, business leaders in the city, trying to get out the messages around what was happening, around infection, etc. And I think it sort of came into its fore really during those, difficult times, really. In addition to those sort of core services, we also do quite a lot of work under contract with West Yorkshire colleagues. So we have our Adventure Business Growth Programme, which is our Startup and Young Business Programme, which is a £5 million contract, which we're currently delivering till 2026. And we are currently looking to help 2,400 businesses across West Yorkshire by March 2026. Looking to generate £6.4 million in loan and grant finance into those businesses and looking to create around 610 new jobs. We have our Digital Enterprise Programme, which again is delivered across West Yorkshire, which is really around getting SMEs to look at adopting new sort of digital technology. And we're looking to help around 480 SMEs by March 2025. And we're looking to generate in excess of £4 million of private sector investment into some of those digital technology projects. We also have within the report listed one of the main council areas of support that we've been working on, which is our rate relief offer, which sits alongside all the other discretionary reliefs, statutory reliefs that the council has. So we have a budget of 1.75 million in total for this year to look at providing discretionary rate relief. And we focused on delivering support to SMEs, which are listed in the report in terms of the categories of SME, up to £15,000 per SME, up to 50% rates relief. And we're targeting to spend around £1 million on that particular rate relief between now and 2025. In the report, we sort of give you a flavour for what impact is all this support having really. And what I would say is that all our externally funded contracts are now externally evaluated. So we've got some quite good evaluation looking back over previous years about what we've actually done. And I've highlighted that within the report in terms of the Adventure programme as an example where we actually delivered 1,678 net new jobs across the city region over a 7-year delivery period, and a return on investment estimated to be around £12 for every £1 spent on the programme as one example. And there's some other examples as well within the report that's highlighted. In Appendix 1, we've just got a list of case studies that we've supported across the various programmes that we're involved in. And in Appendix 2, there's some stats on the current state of the business stock, which I'm glad to report over the last 10 years. I mean, things change from one year to the next, so I'd never look at 1 year's figures in isolation, but over a 10-year period, that business stock has been growing, which is good to see. Is there any questions on the report, comments? Yeah. I'll keep it
That's
short.
a lovely way to finish. Okay, thank you very much. Right, okay. Over to members now. I do have a few questions. So Councillor Wilson had his hands up, and then was it you, Councillor Lay? I'll take in twos, and then
Taking Councillor Lay first.
oh yeah, sorry, because Councillor Lay's got to go. Do you want me to share the news? All right, go on. You tell them yourself.
My wife is being awarded a Excellence in Nursing Award tonight. She's to become a Queen's Nurse, which is an honorarium that one gets. So I have got to get on a train with her. So wish me luck. My quick question is, how do we compare to our peers, as in our other core cities? Because I always tell people that the government seems to think that we're a relatively wealthy city compared to other core cities, and most people don't understand what that really means when we know we've got so much deprivation in our city. So I just wondered how we're doing compared to our core part or our core cities.
So thank you for the question, and I'll invite Phil to add anything that he may have in back of mind. The challenging thing, as you may be aware, but for all members, is that because of our geographical boundary in Leeds, we're often sort of averaged out when compared with other core cities, because we have the city centre and also the surrounding areas included within the local authority boundary. Whereas if you did a comparison with Manchester, their local authority boundary is pretty much the city centre of Manchester. So often when formulas are put together and comparisons are made, then you need to look at whether they're using local authority boundaries or broader areas in that context. The KPI report that comes in January will have the latest kind of up-to-date figures around how we're performing in terms of new starts and all of the ONS official data. I think it's January we're taking KPI report, isn't it? Becky's nodding. So we can go over some of that then. But I was just going to invite Phil through his knowledge about the level of business support and support programs, and whether he's got any observations about the comparison with other areas.
I guess my observation, having been here a long time, is that, you know, Leeds is a relatively healthy place to start and run a business and to grow. You know, we've got a relatively healthy business stock. Doesn't mean to say we haven't got challenges and issues, but every core city would have, I think, similar issues really going forward. That's certainly been the case historically. In terms of business support, much of what we do is similar to what is done elsewhere, being brutally honest, which is, again, is what you would expect in many cases. We face many of the same key challenges. I mean, obviously, over the last few years, it has been a challenging few years for businesses, as it has been for everyone. You know, and we've been grappling with some of those issues, particularly during the pandemic, when my team led on a lot of discretionary grant support that we provided. But the stats at the moment, I mean, they always look back rather than look forward, and that's always one of the dangers with the stats, really, are showing that businesses have survived. We're not seeing any significant issues, but it's something that we're not complacent on really going forward. And, you know, the economy is in a challenging place, and we will just need to see how it goes over the next few years, really.
Just to add one more thing, which is I know that in terms of the growth of the digital sector across the whole of the UK, that growth actually dipped in the last set of figures, but in Leeds it remained strong at about 9% growth. So we were an outlier on that in terms of business growth in that area in particular.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Is that okay? Thank you. Well, yeah, first of all, I was one of the members who requested this item on the work schedule, and what I was interested in was, you know, understanding the level of support that's available to businesses across the city, and I think this report really delivers on that. It's really, really good, really interesting, and I definitely learned from reading it. So thank you for preparing it. Also, I have to say I'm a big fan of your team. I've contacted them about getting support for some businesses in Meanwood in my ward, and they were just you know, straight on it, came to multiple meetings, and just really, really helpful and thoughtful, and they've since gone on to help some of those businesses with tailored support. So I think that's really good, and that leads me on to my first question, which is, there clearly is a lot of support available. How would you evaluate the awareness of what is available amongst businesses, perhaps particularly the kind of stretched smaller businesses in the city who, you know, don't really have time to think about this kind of thing? Do you have an understanding of how aware they are of how much support there is? And I suppose in addition to that, can we as councillors actually do anything to support with that? We can write to the businesses, go and visit them, talk to them. I guess I haven't, since becoming a councillor, thought about that kind of proactive role that much, and that's something I'm quite interested in. 2 more questions. My understanding, I can't remember the exact details, is that the grants available to businesses are have historically been more aimed at business to business businesses. So when some of your team came and spoke to some of the business to consumer businesses in my ward, there wasn't quite as much available for them. That's my memory. Is that something that's changing? Is that something that's been worked on? I think that was about WICA grants in particular. And I think there was a legacy of kind of some European funding and the stipulations around that. And my understanding was that that was being looked at and reviewed. So it'd be good to get an update on that. And finally, I know that looking at energy efficiency and things like that for small businesses is really important, but most of them, or many of them, rent from a landlord. And so there's that problem of you can't really offer the support to the business as such because the landlord captures that benefit. What can we do about that? Is there do we have a group of landlords we can work with? Is there some pragmatic arrangement to sort of try and improve the quality of their businesses and make sure that the businesses renting from them are getting that benefit? Thank you.
Thank you for some really excellent questions. We really welcome the interest and in the business support programme, and thank you for the positive feedback on the staff, and I'll be sure to make sure that both Phil knows he's appreciated and his team. I'll take the one on awareness and then I'll pass to Phil to give a view on the other two. On awareness, it's a never-ending task. So it is a never-ending task to make sure that businesses are aware of what is on offer. So we can never stop. We have some really nicely established brands now in the form of Adventure and Digital Enterprise, and we negotiated with the combined authority that those brands would be kept when the European funding fell away, and the combined authority funding, either Gain Share or UK Share Prosperity Fund, came in. And we made the case for that on the basis of the brand familiarity and the need to keep going with that. And we're supported by WICA, so that's a real positive thing. But the short answer is we'll never stop. We've always got to get out there. And that's why Phil's team are really good at finding the networks to get into to try and connect to businesses and get out there and build awareness. And we also have a policy of no wrong door. So if somebody comes in for one programme, for example, and they don't qualify for that, then we will always try and connect them to the right place for them in terms of business support. And that's a policy that works across the West Yorkshire area again. So if a business comes to us and they're actually needing to talk to someone from Wakefield, we'll always do a warm connection to the right person in the team in Wakefield. That we always try and adopt that approach. What can councillors do? Absolutely, councillors can advocate for business support services that we have. And maybe Councillor Marshall-Caton, that's another kind of quick education piece we could maybe do sometime, where we get some of Phil's team just to talk through in a little bit more detail what's on offer, so that councillors feel equipped to be able to just direct people in the right direction. Anything you can do to flag our services to your businesses in your wards is great. I'll let Phil come in on the other points.
Yeah, in terms of the question around business to consumer businesses and the overall position on grants, it's probably fair to say that there's a lot less grant money available now than there was during the days of European funding. We are typically grappling with, we think, probably around a third less in real terms. And so the grant side of things is one of the things that has been quite heavily squeezed, I have to say, really. As an example, within our Adventure programme, we're partnering with a loan provider and pushing the loans message as much as we're pushing the grants message, and making it more an integrated message to say to businesses, look, we may only have a limited amount of grant money, but we can connect you up with loan providers who can provide you with a good deal and a good offer as such. In terms of the issue around particular criteria, I think it's a challenging one. I think it's probably fair to say it's part of an ongoing debate within the combined authority about what we can do to support, business to consumer businesses, and particularly certain businesses. So as an example, when we were having the discussions in the council around discretionary rate relief, one of the areas that we felt that we should offer support to was, childcare day nurseries, which are very much, B2C focused. And we, had a real clear rationale. We could identify those businesses relatively easily. We had a clear rationale around why we were providing support and what added value we thought we could bring with our limited resources. And I think we probably need to do that more. So I think what I'd say is it's work in progress. I don't think we're there yet. We recognise it's a problem, it's an issue, but we need to work harder on it with some of our partners really going forward to find, that right balance, reflecting the resources that we've got available, the priorities that we've got both within the council and within the wider West Yorkshire Partnership, and also around managing expectations of businesses out there, which again, one of our issues is always, how do we get that, I think the last thing we want to do is raise people's expectations that there's all this support here, and then find there isn't support for them for whatever reason it might be. So it's about managing those messages effectively so that we are engaging and we're putting some of those things out correctly.
Quickly, Phil, just to add to that, Greater Manchester have actually done some really interesting work that I've had kind of came across my radar a couple of weeks ago about the foundational economy, so which is mostly B2C, and so there's a kind of a bit of a model about some of the work they're doing that we can work with the combined authority on, just to consider how that's being taken into account as we move forwards.
I think in terms of the question around energy efficiency, I think, as was mentioned in the last presentation around council's assets, it's clearly a massive challenge. I mean, if you look at the figures nationally around the amount of refurbishment required across the whole of the UK, it is huge, and not to be underestimated. We've sort of touched on that as a service because we were involved with the refurbishment of Leeds Media Centre, and we were the ones who brought forward a project and found the money to refurbish that particular property, and we took it from an EPC rating of an E to an EPC rating of a B, which for a 1930s building was a significant achievement. So it's like anything else; it can be done if you've got enough money to do it. I think is pretty much the sort of message on it, really. In terms of landlords' position there, yes, again, we need to be doing probably more work with the combined authority and getting some of those points across. I mean, I have been trying to make that point around the existing sustainability offer. There's nothing wrong with the offer, but it has its limitations. And I think you're quite right in saying that we probably need to look to see what more we could do to engage with landlords going forward, really, and look at how can we potentially tackle some of what's going to be a massive issue across the city and across West Yorkshire.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Those were very brilliant questions. So thank you. Councillor Rountree.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of quite brief specific questions. The main thing I had intended to ask was anticipated by Councillor Wilson's first question, so skip over that. I was thinking of experience I've had with one business owner in my ward, owner manager of quite a substantial restaurant, who told me that he was facing difficulties recruiting and retaining staff. I'm just wondering if that is a kind of query that you would be able to assist with and point him in the direction of help for that, some kind of support. And the other was quite a specific one, actually, a question about your stats for the business stock. I'm just wondering what we've got a number of businesses here, whether it's based on businesses paying business rates or if it's broader than that. If it distinguishes, thinking about, like, say, individual contractors who may or may not be active at a particular time. What's the basis of those figures, basically? Thank you.
So on the first, the Employment and Skills team provide a business-focused service that will help employers if they're looking to recruit. So yes, we can respond, but it's through the route is through the Employment and Skills team. But again, no wrong door. So if you do talk to someone in Phil's team, they'll make sure that it's connected to the right people in Employment and Skills. But that is attached to them. I'll let Phil answer the other question.
Yeah, in terms of the second question on the stats I provided were the national stats, which tend to be drawn from VAT and PAYE data. I think any set of stats you have around businesses will always have a heavy health warning on it, being brutally honest, particularly when you go down to the smaller level. You know, certainly if you went down below district level, the national statistics probably would not be very useful to you. And we've always had this challenge about how do we track what's going on in the economy. So again, it's an ongoing issue, really, in terms of how we get better information that feeds into what we do.
Thank you very much. On page 25 of your report for the Adventure Business Growth Programme, I know it does say that you've got a target of 2,400 businesses by March 2026. How many do you currently support?
The target of 2,400 businesses is around how many we would engage with as such, and we're working on the current contract has only been going since July. I don't actually have the up-to-date figures. I can get the figures for you to show you how many we've got. I know it's well over 200 businesses that we've got on portfolio at the moment, and we're growing that. We've literally been out recruiting a new team in the last 3 months, really. So we're still gearing up the programme to where we want it to be, really, at the moment. But yes, I can provide some more stats for you.
Okay, thank you very much. On the same page as well, under the inclusive growth rate relief, do you think, in terms of viability and practicality, are we still able to continue this program 24-25, given the current pressures we've got on the council?
As it stands, it's still part of the budget plans for the next financial year. The thing about the business rates relief programme to remember is that the rates relief is applied before the business pays, so it costs us 50%, if that makes sense, of the well, it's not 50% actually, because 1% goes to fire and ambulance. So it costs us 49% actually of the rates relief that is given, and it's a really positive thing that Victoria's Finance Director has kept that support in place, because it's the only lever we have as a council to provide business support outside of programmes that are externally funded and therefore quite bounded in terms of outcomes that have to be achieved. And we do use it quite frequently, both to support businesses to stay in Leeds and businesses that are kind of making significant investments in parts of the city where they're securing jobs for people here. So, you know, it's really pleasing that that's continuing to be part of the budget next year.
I think it's also worth noting that 50% of the cost of that rate relief is met through the national rating pool under the current, business retention routes that we have. So it's a relatively cost-effective way for the council to offer support.
Okay, thank you. And on page 26, that's the next page. In terms of the anchors program that you have, what's the engagement like with that one? How many organizations are engaged with it?
In the Business Anchors programme, funnily enough, I was just signing off a report earlier to say how many there were actually, so I can give you a quick, bear with me one second. Do you know what? Go on to the next question and I'll find the answer for you, so I don't have to write to you later with it.
Okay, no problem at all. That's fine. So all of these services are this kind of, in terms of promotion, I know you did say, as many of us can advertise in our wards. Are you making use of your Leeds Digital Festival, so that the community are aware of all of these very, very good programs that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So Daniil in Phil's team is a really fantastic communications and marketing professional, and programmes like Digital Enterprise and Adventure will have a presence at events at the Digital Festival and put events on themselves in different parts of Leeds and the region to raise awareness. So the team are always out and about at other people's events or our own events and getting the brand awareness out there for different things. And as I say, if someone finds a route in through Adventures, let's say, but that programme isn't right for them, we'll always connect them to another part of the team.
Okay, so just looking at the 11% cut in the Leeds City Council budget for 24 and 25, is there any scope to recoup, any of this funding via external sources or any of the collaboration that we have across the region?
So the saving that's being applied to Phil's area in the next financial year is through removing a post from the council's core budget funding to being externally funded. So in a way, we're already doing that, if that makes sense. So we're not actually kind of cutting the service in Phil's area, we're doing substitution. So the business, the good news is that the business support service will remain the same next year. It's the thing is with Phil's area, because a lot of the cuts were made in previous years, a large part of the business support programme is already externally funded. So the risk was actually last year when we were transitioning from European funding and that money dropped off. And we were able to secure that continuity of funding through the combined authority in terms of accessing gain share and the UK share prosperity funding. So from a funding perspective, the thing that we need to watch is that UK share prosperity fund money only runs till the end of next year at this stage. So we don't know what the position with that will be beyond next financial year. And obviously gain share funding is reviewed on a regular basis by the combined authority. So, but that's not an unfamiliar situation for us to be in across economic development. It's how employment and skills and business support operate. And with experienced leaders like Phil in a position to be able to kind of manage that relationship with the combined authority, whilst there is risk, I'm confident that we can manage that risk in terms of keeping the business support offer in place.
Okay, thank you. So if I ask for two examples from the large businesses that we have in the city in terms of the issues that they face and constraints in their growth, what will that be? And what levers do we have as a council in supporting them?
Great question. So answering the question about the Anchors network, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 members of the founding members of the Anchors network. And the Business Anchors network is targeted primarily at medium and large businesses initially, in order to get bigger impact through their supply chains on SMEs and across the city in terms of their employees. So that's just addressing that. If you were to sort of ask me what's the challenge of one of a large employer in the city, the challenges that we can talk to businesses around can be quite wide ranging. So they can there's usually interest in skills, recruitment and retention. Those kind of issues will be different for different organisations. So interestingly, for example, a professional services organisation like KPMG, this might sound a bit odd, but they might struggle to recruit digital talent, because digital talent actually wants to go and work in a much more sexy digital business than work for a big 5 consultancy. So they might be really quite interested in raising their brand to the digital sector and showing that they've got jobs in digital in their organisation. Large companies also tend to be interested in things like travel planning, particularly if they're moving offices. And we will, of course, get queries from large businesses when we're doing some of our highways works in the cities. Obviously, when there was a disruption around City Square, there was quite a big need to communicate to our large employers around the changes around transport in the city. And so it's really important we have them with us. Most of those large obligations will be having a sustainable transport plan and trying to get colleagues to use sustainable routes to work. The Combined Authority actually have a service that can be used by employers for some of that. Other areas would be sourcing premises. So for manufacturing businesses in the city, one of the challenges we do have is access to large warehouse space and premises that can help businesses to grow. So that's often a challenge. But again, Phil has an excellent lead in David Baggerley, who's worked with the manufacturing sector for many years and works really closely through the Manufacturing Alliance to kind of make sure that we've got the expertise to support. But we can come up against a situation where a business might be looking at premises in Wakefield or Bradford because of the kind of provision of space of that nature in the manufacturing space. That type of space question can also be asked when we're talking about high growth companies. So we have a lack of grow on space at the moment. So grow on space is space essentially for businesses that are in that high growth curve. So they don't necessarily want a really big office like for 400 people, but they want flexible office spaces at a reasonable price where they can grow their staffing numbers quickly. So we've got a lot more of that in the market in Leeds now than we used to have, but we absolutely need more, and that's part of our planning around the innovation arc. So it sort of kind of gives you kind of a bit of a flavour. I think the incentives we have, we tend to apply a wrap around businesses that approach us, the larger businesses, in a number of ways. One thing that we do very well in Leeds is accelerate companies' ability to connect into the city. So it's not something that has a financial value on it, but if a company chooses to locate in Leeds, we can plug them in really, really quickly into the right people in Leeds University or Leeds Beckett. We can plug them into support service for raising their profile for recruitment. We'll help them with employment searches. We will make sure that they kind of can be as successful as possible with that wrap around them. So we'll do that, as well as looking at financial incentives if we have them. But the Combined Authority don't have large financial incentives in the way that they once did for attracting businesses into the city. One area I didn't cover would be trade as well. So obviously, we don't have trade expertise in our teams in the council, but the Combined Authority does. and there are programmes to support businesses to do international trade. And that can also lean into support that comes through DBT in terms of if a business decides they want to take their product overseas, they can access support to help them with that trading process. So that's another kind of inquiry that comes up. Phil, I'm going to ask you to mark my homework, and did I miss anything?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, I think there's a multitude of issues out there that impede growth, but the ones that tend to come to the council tend to be land and property related, which, you know, historically we've had a heavy involvement in as a large landowner ourselves, and the issues around recruitment selection. I think they're always going to, well, in recent years they've been top 3, top 5 with most businesses, to be brutally honest. Lots of businesses will say we can't recruit, we can't retain, and as ever it's getting below the surface on some of those issues, really.
Often some of those recruitment and retention issues that a business might be having is because they're not well connected to education providers, or they don't understand some of the ways that they can use apprenticeships, for example, or they just need a bit of support. So it's not always because they can't find people. Sometimes it's just because they need some stronger connections into the city, and that's where the employment and skills team often comes in.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I don't know if this is in your radar, and this only been within the last few days in terms of business safety. And that's being that I'm a city centre councillor. So businesses, even though they're not my residents, but because their businesses are in the city centre, we've got to look after them. And we're beginning to have a high number of antisocial behaviour and theft, and businesses, owners with shops where hooligans actually go in and threaten and actually steal. So what are we doing as a council to support? Because what we do not want to do is get them really, really scared of, you know, opening businesses or shops in our city centre. So has that come into your radar recently at all? Yes, Councillor.
Not through this programme, but it has come up as an issue. I sit down fairly often with members of the BID, the Business Improvement District, and it's something they raise with me quite a lot. We've had a few months ago a joint meeting with city centre management, with the police, the BID and other businesses. So I don't have any detailed information on it now, but just to reassure the board that that is something which we are quite aware of and looking at.
Thank you very much. Could you kindly keep me updated on whatever is available so that we can also advise accordingly? Okay, thank you, Councillor Shazad.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. It's really well written. I just wanted to inquire on page 25 on your Startup and Grow business support on the Leeds High Street for diverse people from diverse backgrounds. What sort of offer is available for that? Is that for people that are already running a small business, or is it for people with ideas? And it does mention the Leeds Kirkgate Market. Is there anything on offer, like some sort of trial stores where you don't have to really pay any rent and trial out and what's actually available? Because I actually wasn't aware of this, so it'd be good to get more information. Thank you.
Yeah. The project is really about extending the current library's provision out of the central library into communities using the existing libraries network. There is like a pop-up facility at Kirkgate Market that's also being provided at the moment. I'm probably not the best person to actually answer the question around Kirkgate Market, but I know we have provided support to enable people to start up and almost taste running a business really in the market.
Yeah, just to reiterate, there are a huge number of opportunities at the market. There are often smaller stalls on big wheelbarrow things that you can start, and actually a lot of our newer stalls started out as that. If people wanted to take an outdoor stall, those can be rented ad hoc. You don't need to necessarily kind of sign a long lease. So there are a huge amount of opportunities for new traders at the market, and actually often those new traders do become permanent ones in the market. There's a number of great examples of that.
So that's great to hear, but what's the actual offer that's going to be going out from the central library? What is actually on offer? That's what I want to know.
It's principally information services. So it's taking the information resources that the library have out into communities. They also run things like enterprise clubs, and they do run seminars and workshops. We also try and connect up the libraries into some of the mainstream offer that's around as well. So there's quite a lot of information and research that's available for principally for startup, but also for existing businesses as well.
Yeah, could we have something that we could actually advertise as councillors to get this information out to residents who might be interested and who are not aware of this support that's going to be rolled out?
Yes, certainly. I know that our colleagues in the library are just about to go to press with some leaflets that have been delayed, to be fair, but are due out in the new year.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any more questions or comments from members. Just to say a very huge thank you to Councillor Pryor, to Iv and to Phil for your contributions and for this great report as well. We truly appreciate all that you do. And I know this is the last meeting with yourselves for 2023, and I know we are coming back in the new year with some other items, but obviously we'll allow you have a very Merry Christmas in the interim, and we wouldn't put any pressure on you until next year. So thank you all for coming. Don't leave just yet. We've just got 2 agenda items, and I'm sure Becky will be really quick. So over to you, Becky.
Chair, under the work schedule, it's just if you can just ask members to note that you've got your remote working group on the budget consultation next Thursday. It's on Teams rather than it in person. That's the only one I wanted to note.
Okay, thank you very much. So our next meeting will be on the 10th of January at 10:30 a.m. And of course, members are expected to turn up for 10:15 a.m. for a pre-meeting. And thank you to all those who are subbing today. I hope you've truly enjoyed our scrutiny board, and see you all in the new year. Thank you and have a Merry Christmas.